The intermission is over, and the Podcast Daily is ready to dive back into the State of the Position series with Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward, and we're over to the defensive side of the ball. It's the final countdown.
It is, yeah. There's three. No, well, I guess it'll depend on how we want to do the secondary, but there are at least three of these left. Perhaps four. We'll see. We'll see if anyone else offers us up content the rest of this week before Big Ten Media Days. But it is now. It does feel like State of the Position has now turned into a countdown to Big Ten Media Days, which are next week.
We've made it.
We have made it.
The finish line is in sight. There's going to be content. Going to be in Indianapolis next week. So I'm excited.
Me too. I can't. It's not even the Big Ten Media Days are next week. It's like it's that camp is like in 2 weeks.
Yes. So we will be done with State of the Position this week in all likelihood. And we'll be getting ready for the trip to Indianapolis by next Monday. But that doesn't matter right now because it's Tuesday, and we're going to talk about Larry Johnson's defensive line, which is veteran, talented, and deep. So I guess that means it's going to be pretty good.
Theoretically deep. Right?
Theoretically deep. Okay.
See, I don't know. Like, if you were to ask me, like, are they going to have good enough defensive line depth this year? I would say yes, but I don't know that that's a question that's been answered affirmatively just yet. Especially at tackle. Maybe you feel a little bit better about defensive end because Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry have played a decent amount. I would say probably not as much as I would have assumed to this point, especially Caden Curry because he was like on the field immediately as a true freshman. I think he was the only player in his recruiting class that played every single game his freshman season. But I would say neither of those guys, Kenyatta nor Caden, played quite as much as I thought they were going to play last year. So I would still view them as somewhat unknown commodities. So like again, like I don't think I'm concerned about it, the depth generally. But I do think it's a question that needs to be answered, which probably can't be answered until they start playing games.
Yeah, that will be the truth serum, because otherwise we'll hear, from Ryan Day and Larry Johnson, and they'll both say, oh, well, I think that this group could play 12 or 13 guys. And I think that that's true. Mm-hmm. But will they do that, or should they do that? Those are also two different questions.
Yeah, and good questions, because I remained a little surprised, I think, about how just how much of a switch there was from previous rotation sort of ideology to what they did last year, which was like not really rotate at all. It was 3 tackles and kind of 2 ends for like the entire season, which like if your guys are really good, I don't have much of a problem with that. Like some programs only have 4 defensive linemen they can play. I would argue that a place like Ohio State should have more guys to play. Whether or not you choose to play them is another discussion. I don't know if they were quite ready to be maybe as expansive as I thought they would be last year with the rotation. They should be this year. I know some of these guys are young. Some of these defensive tackles in particular are only going into their second season, but I think they should be lined up to probably play, 8 guys up front, I would say at minimum. And I think they're going to have to over the course of the season, which could be as long as 17 games, 16 games. But I also, we talked about this a lot. Like I don't mean to beat a dead horse necessarily, but I do think that the best version of this Ohio State defense features a deep defensive line where you can rotate without much of a drop off in a way that like makes sure your absolute best guys are playing at 100 or as close to 100% capacity as they could be, barring injury, by the end of the year when you're trying to go on that long playoff run. So I do think they need to change up a little bit how they managed personnel last year compared to last year.
Yeah, and I think maybe we'll never get a definitive, concrete answer on that, but it goes back to what you said with your, theoretical question about the depth. Was the shift last year because JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer were so good and they were so willing to play as many snaps as possible and able to do that? I think about the Notre Dame game and then playing every snap. Yes, Ohio State gave up 2 touchdown drives in the second half, but when the game was on the line, both of those guys showed up and did not look fatigued, didn't look unable to make plays when they needed to. So is it those guys had elevated to such a point and Ohio State had self-evaluated that maybe they were rotating too much? Okay, that's over here. Or is there something where Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson weren't at a level that Ohio State trusted them enough in big-time situations? And how is that different for them now? We don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But it could be a combination of both of those things being true. But one way or another, I think there's going to have to be a tweak of taking something out of Category A and something out of Category B to get to the point that Ohio State really wants that group to be.
Yeah, I don't know. I've sort of come around to the idea that like this like conversation about rotation is more about like what I think Ohio State should look like, not necessarily what they need to look like. I was going back through some stuff like, obviously if you look at like Georgia's defense, you want to use that as a comparison. They play a lot of guys. I think Nick Saban historically played a lot of guys on his defense, especially in the front. Michigan played a decent amount of guys last year, although I've not actually gone back and looked to see like in their biggest games, maybe that rotation got pared down some. They had the luxury of like not playing a meaningful game for 10 weeks, so the snap counts get kind of thrown out of whack. But I've gone back and looked at like 2014 Ohio State. Like they didn't rotate up front. They played like 4 guys all year. They played like 11 guys on defense all year. There was like no rotation with that defense, and they were really good and they won a national championship. So I'm not saying that like you can't get by only playing your best 4 or 5 guys if that's what it works out to. I just think a place like Ohio State and the way it recruits should be able to play more guys, should have a defense just like kind of comes at you in waves. And then at the end of the year, you're like, man, JT and Jack and Tyleek and Ty Hamilton are like really fresh and like really playing their best football because we were able to rotate them in and out, like steal some rest time for them. Like that should be on the table for a place like Ohio State. So will it be? I hope so. If it's not quite as expansive as I'm imagining, maybe that won't be totally surprising, only because like a lot of these guys are fairly young still. But I think at end especially, like Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry should be like ready to go, and Ohio State I think should be ready to trust those guys to like throw them out there in meaningful moments. So I felt that in the past, and it's not really come to fruition. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, there's something you mentioned there, Bill, that I think that's important. Like it's the biggest games. Those guys have to be fresh and available probably to play the maximum amount of snaps. Is that true for the first 3 weeks of the regular season? No. So it's situational and it's scheduled, both. Like taking those opportunities. If you are in a blowout, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau do not need those reps against Akron. They just don't. That's not going to help them. Certainly you don't want them to be in bubble wrap for 4 weeks and then roll them out once you get to Michigan State and Iowa and Oregon. Like they need to play. They need to be getting football reps in action. But I think that's the one part that I think when we have the rotation conversation has to be part of it. And the other is like taking advantage of game leverage situations, because there were too many times, which are the ones that got me worked up, and I mentioned them. If it's 1st and 10 for the opponent inside the 5 coming out, and you just decide that that's the opportunity, that's the time of the game that you're going, well, we were going to play the 3rd string line here and get them reps. Like that's failing your roster. That's failing to maximize your potential. So I think I don't feel like last year was an overcorrection. I think it was addressing something that they had looked at, and that included a study that they were looking at Alabama and Georgia and like how many snaps Will Anderson played over the course of the year. Not that there's a perfect comparison for Will Anderson on Ohio State's roster at that point, but he was playing like 200 snaps more than anybody else on Ohio State's defensive line or wherever, any position you wanted to name. And that's the part where they're like, well, if he can do it, why can't these guys?
Yeah, I don't know if lack of rotation in the end was like to Ohio State's detriment. Like I think the end of the Notre Dame game, you said like there was some stuff that was given up on the ground. That was more like beginning of the second half. Like by the end of the game, like they're making play. Like the defense kind of won the game for them. And then maybe they got worn down a little bit at the end of the Cotton Bowl. But like I don't care about what happened in the Cotton Bowl anymore. If I'm being,
they still only
honest.
gave up 14 points in that game, as well as Notre Dame.
Right.
Like you should win that game if you're Ohio State.
I think that's always in the back of your mind. Like if you're in a tight game in the 4th quarter, is your defensive line going to be in the shape that it needs to be in to go win you that game? And we've definitely seen some games in the past. Like I think of a few Penn State games where it just felt like the Ohio State's defensive line last 5-10 minutes of the game was like, this game is ours. Penn State, you're not winning. And I think some of those years, like they had a fairly robust rotation on the defensive line that allowed them to be in that state come kind of crunch time. So I would just like the peace of mind maybe that comes with that for this particular defense. And if it works out, if it turns out that they don't have it, like I still think they can probably accomplish their goals, but it would also be a little bit of a letdown, I think, if they don't ultimately get to that point. Because again, I just think it's somewhere where Ohio State should be.
So that I think is primarily a conversation about the defensive ends. We know that they're There's been more rotation, more, and understandably more so at defensive tackle. But you still have two. I'm going to call Ty Hamilton a starter. He started.
I think it's fair.
Started, ahead of my call in a number of games anyway already.
Played more snaps than almost doubled him in snaps, I think.
Yeah. So Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams gives you that group. We've talked a lot about sort of the ascension and the flashes from Hero Canoe last year. You feel like that will be the first three, or are you? I know that you're on alert a little bit more for Jason Moore. I expect a big jump from Caden McDonald. I guess we don't know exactly how that will look.
Other than I know, like Tyleik's going to play the most, right? I think everyone knows that he could be an All-American this year. He's on some preseason lists, and I think deservedly so. After that, I'm not sure. Like I would also call Ty Hamilton a starter right now, but like it's not like snap count wise, like he and Tyleik were like practically even. There was a big separation between what Tyleik played and what everybody else in the room played. So like if Hero Canoe becomes a real dude, if Jason Moore or Caden McDonald or Tywone Malone shows that they're really ready, like maybe they like share a starting role with Ty Hamilton. I'm not entirely sure. I kind of feel like it's not wide open, but I think that the door is cracked maybe for someone to emerge to be that second defensive tackle in terms of snap counts behind Tyleik, and maybe I'm not 100% certain that that'll be Ty Hamilton, but who I think is a very good, reliable player. But if like, especially if one of those guys that we mentioned like really shows like a pass rushing knack, which I do think they're going to miss on the interior with Mike Hall gone, I could see that particular player maybe kind of rising up the ranks a little bit, which is why I'm pretty high on Jason Moore. And part of it too is like Larry Johnson saying like Jason Moore's the guy that really caught my eye in the spring. But I like as a former defensive end, the guy who's like pretty long levered and I think maintained a decent amount of quickness despite being probably 50 pounds heavier than he was coming out of high school now. If he's the guy with like the highest pass rushing upside on the interior, I could see that being his kind of pathway to being a guy who maybe plays the most outside of Tyleik. I wouldn't say that now, but I wouldn't write it off either.
I think in general, I'm higher on Ty Hamilton than most people. And I would go back and look at the splash plays, look at some of the PFF numbers and like how consistently high he was grading, like to help strengthen my argument. Like, I don't know that I'm going to have to do that this year. Maybe I'll be proven wrong over the course of the year, but I can't forget about the late career surge from his brother and how dominant Devon Hamilton was. They're not the exact same player, but they do have the same work ethic. They play the game in a similar fashion in terms of their motor. And Ty Hamilton, in terms of production at this point, is ahead of where his brother was. And then Ohio State does stuff like makes him a dude of the week, like 2 out of the last 3 weeks for the summer off-season workout program. It's like, I know that next wave is coming, and they're very talented, and they all have higher recruiting profiles than Ty Hamilton. But man, I feel like that could be something special with him and Tyleik Williams side by side. I'm out on that limb, and it doesn't even feel that shaky to me.
It's probably not. Like I think there are a few reasons you could be very confident. Like Ty Hamilton, like the one thing he is similar to Devon with is like he can throw some weight around. He has some guys like who's the strongest guy on the team. You'll hear a lot of like Donovan Jackson and Ty Hamilton. So maybe they are more similar than perhaps you want to give them credit for. And you are right that Ty has been, I think, probably far more productive and reliable to this point in his career than Devon was going into his 5th year. So like that tandem of Tyleik and Ty Hamilton can definitely be as good as Ohio State needs it to be, if not significantly better. Like I am in no way whatsoever writing off Ty Hamilton. But I do think it's just worth keeping in the back of your mind. Like the recruiting pedigree of some of the guys behind him is fairly noteworthy. And it just felt like in the spring, like a lot of those guys were kind of finding their footing a little bit. I think Jason Moore and Caden McDonald in particular, and we all love Hero Canoe too. So like any of those three, like I'm on alert for like kind of like breakout candidate on the defense. But Ty is steady, man, and there's something to be said for that. And I do think this staff in particular going into this season is putting more of a premium on just sort of like, you know what you're going to get, and we know this guy's played a lot of football. And by the way, he's talented on top of that. So like that, all that lines up for Ty to play a huge role in this defense, no matter how it shakes out. Like starter, non-starter, he's going to play a bunch.
Yeah, and that's how it all lines up for this 2024 season, where really Ohio State has everything that it could, I think, ask for. We'll see if they deliver once the lights come on at the end of August, but it gets a little bit more intriguing when you start thinking about 2025 and the fact that JT, Jack, and Ty are all going to be gone.
Yeah, like if Hero Kadu's a guy that makes a jump, he could be gone too. He's draft eligible after this year, so it'll be interesting. That is like my talk about rotation and like needing to play guys more. It's almost more about next year than it is about this season, because like you can't go into 2025 just thinking like, well, I think these guys are good. I guess we'll find out. By the way, we played Texas in week 2, so like those guys need to play this year because they just can't go into the 2025 season as green as they are right now. And like Kenyatta and Caden have played, and that's good, but like I think they need to play more. I think they probably need to be in more high leverage situations if Ohio State can afford it this year. And then the young tackles definitely need to play. It's like Tyleik and Ty I think have played a little over 2,000 snaps, and then the rest of that room I think has like 200 snaps, and that might even be high. But like there's a large discrepancy between those two guys at the top and the rest of the room, which isn't surprising when you realize a lot of them are like sophomores, but those sophomores need to, or redshirt freshmen, I think technically a couple of them, need to play this year. I would even include Will Smith in that. Like I think he's probably behind a lot of those other young guys in the room because he didn't play at all last year. But like if you can get him on the field this fall, you have to. You have to know what you have in those guys, because at the moment they do remain a rather large mystery, even if there's reason to like what you saw to them as recruits. We just need to know that it actually has translated to the college level, because you're going to need 4 new defensive line starters next year.
And Larry Johnson has had some success on the recruiting trail over the summer. That's been one of the areas that you circle over the last couple of years where they get to signing day. Now, there's still a long time to go till you get to that point, and when you're dealing with that part of the country and some of the high-profile guys that Ohio State has commitments for, your battle is never over. Like that was, it feels like there has been some sort of adjustment, whether that's in approach or just a matter of success or connection, relationship. I have no idea, but like that had taken a dip for Larry Johnson, and the sack production goes right along with that, with high level players and high level recruiting. Seems like everything is coming back through on the other side for him now.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. I wonder like how much Edric Houston sticking with Ohio State helped maybe kids in the subsequent classes realize like, oh, like Ohio State is still a place I can go to get developed the way that I expect. They'll have good draft production after this year. I think they'll lose all 4 starters, but like I like at least 3 of them I think are going to be like at worst day 2 picks, and we'll see what Ty Hamilton, because Devon was a 3rd round pick, right? So I don't know. Ty does that. It's on the table. So if all 4 of your defensive line starters are, day 2 or better draft picks, I think that'll catch some people's eyeballs too. So it feels like it's getting back to where it needs to go. I still wonder, like, we don't necessarily have to have this conversation now, but I do wonder, like, philosophically moving forward, what do they want to be up front in terms of like 4 down, 3 down, being a little variable there, and then how that might impact recruiting down the line. It does seem like maybe the turnover with this line from 2024 to 2025 might open the door to be a little more multiple up front if you want it to be. I don't know if they're going to be this year. I hope they are, but I think they probably won't be, just based off track record. But I still think long term they'd like to be, and I think you could next year, looking at some of the pieces they'll all coming back and some of the inexperience. I want to ask you a question about Mitchell Melton, whose name we have not said yet. Yeah. How much do you think he's going to play this year? Because like, I'm talking myself into it again, and I don't know if I need to stop.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see it, and I think that we mentioned CJ Hicks the most when it comes to the jack position, but Mitchell Melton doesn't have to just be in that spot as a hybrid, linebacker and pass rusher. He can line up at defensive end and be a real weapon, and it's taken him 2 full years to really get back to 100%. The things that I saw in spring, the conversations that I had with him about his health and like how that compares now to August of last year and getting through training camp, like it's such a dramatic difference. And hearing the perspective on how severe the injury truly was and what that process was like, I hope that he gets the opportunity. And I don't know what it looks like. If you blind him up next to Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, trying to figure out which one of those guys is next to go be like, could you be the backup in a pass rushing situation to go play on the end? I don't know that Ohio State says, Mitchell Melton, you're right here and you're ready to go.
Yeah.
But there have been enough snaps in practice and in Student Appreciation Day and in the spring game where it's like, maybe by August that conversation would be different. So I don't know. I think it would help him as well as CJ Hicks if they carved out a designated role for that jack. And maybe Mitchell Melton can be the one that prompts that change with Larry Johnson because he's in the room and he spent multiple years learning how to be a rushman pass rusher. Maybe he can be the one that does that, and then it becomes 150 to 200 snaps of actually doing it, because Ohio State can't afford to take CJ Hicks out of the linebacker room. And if that's what it takes, and I'm speculating, that's my understanding about why that disconnect that we talked about on Monday exists, why we haven't seen the jack. Mitchell Melton is in that room, been in that room. Maybe that is the impetus for change that Ohio State might need.
I would imagine people might just like look at the Mitchell Melton conversation as like a thing that people like us like kind of grab onto and talk about because it's a little different in the offseason. And maybe it's not all that meaningful, but Josh Simmons saying in the spring that the hardest guy to block from a pass rushing standpoint is Mitchell Melton has not left my mind. I just Josh Simmons, who is Ohio State's most athletic offensive lineman, I think like by a fairly significant margin, says he has a little bit of a trouble blocking Mitchell Melton because Mitchell Melton's like kind of crafty and like rushes a little differently than everybody else. And on incredibly small sample sizes, I think we've seen that a little bit. Granted, it's been against like backup offensive linemen for other teams. So like, will that translate against starters? Like, I don't know, but I would love to see like a third down package that's like one of Jack or JT kicking inside with Tyleek, and then the other one of those ends there, and like there's Mitchell Melton, and like CJ Hicks and Sonny Styles are out there too, and it's like go ahead and block this.
Yeah,
see if you can handle it. Like it goes back to the thing we've talked about a lot in different forms, like being creative and just sort of embracing specialized skill sets. And it does feel like maybe Mitchell Melton has one, but it sounds like he has one that could help this defense that has not, in my opinion, affected quarterbacks enough the last few years. And is he definitely an answer? I have no idea, but he's an answer, or he's a player that I think it's worth exploring if he can be the answer, because I don't think it can hurt Ohio State to put a guy out there who might have some pass rushing chops.
No, and I think he's ready to do that.
Yeah.
And then at that point, then it becomes a matter of schematics and personnel groupings. Like are we going to see that to the level that we want? Is that then to feed into the same conversation that we have all the time about rotation? Like, is it something that is absolutely necessary for Ohio State to be the best defense in the country? No. Is it the national championship teams and defenses that are all-time greats have those other things that elevate them? And I think that's where it comes into it. And again, I'm not suggesting that that's an easy conversation to have or an easy concession to make or an easy balance to find. Like, if it was, they already would have done that. Like, they're trying to win football games. I understand that. It's a lot easier for us to sit up here and dream up a lot of different ways to use everybody. We know how talented these players are. And then you get to Saturdays and like, they could have done this. Well, if they win the games, fine. We'll have that. Yeah. We'll have that conversation if it hurts them. If they don't do it or don't, however it works out, we'll see. But it's not hard to like come up from the outside with schemes to use Mitchell Melton, to unleash CJ Hicks, to get Jason Moore and Caden McDonald involved, or to see Caden Curry, or to kick, pair JT and Jack on the same side. Like, all those things exist, and it's not like anyone on Ohio State's defensive staff isn't aware of that.
No, yeah, like they are. They're definitely aware. We ask about it enough.
Yeah,
they're aware at this point. We're probably going to ask about it a bunch more in camp, and maybe that'll be to no end, and they're just going to play the four guys, and they'll be fine, and they'll be very good. But I think they have the opportunity to like drastically, perhaps, maybe drastically is too strong a word, but raise their ceiling some if they embrace some of this creativity we're talking about. I want to put you on the spot.
Okay,
we know the four guys: Jack, JT, Tyleek, and Ty.
Okay.
If you had to pick a fifth guy who's going to be like the most important, most impactful, whatever, who you pick him?
Had to be.
It could be end or a tackle. Doesn't matter.
I am really excited for Caden McDonald. I feel like that's where it's going to come from the interior positions, because Tyleek and Ty are going to need some breaks. You shouldn't ask them, if they play 16 games, they should not be approaching 900 snaps.
We'll see.
Right? Like that shouldn't happen. And You and Berm have good reason to love Jason Moore. It just elevated the stuff that I heard in the middle of last year about what Caden McDonald was bringing on the practice field, and then him getting involved that very next week against Purdue. The fact that they trusted his athleticism enough to play him on offense in the Cotton Bowl sticks in my mind. So maybe that's still too far for me to say that he's fifth, because I have to assume that Caden Curry is going to, in some form or fashion, play more snaps than him.
Yeah, probably.
But he's the one that I think can be a real difference maker as a number 5 or number 6.
There's no wrong answer, so that's a very good answer. And the fact that he did play offense is like wild. So I think he could be onto something there. My pick would still be Jason Moore, but it's not like a definite concrete. Of course, it's that guy. Like, it could be him, it could be Caden, it could be Hero, it could be Tywone Malone, like, who was like at the 60th overall recruit coming out of high school. He's just not played a whole lot, so I don't know. Like, he's a freaky athlete too. So if he puts it all together, it could be him. That's what makes his position group exciting. Is like, it could be any of them. It just feels like it needs to be someone. It could be anyone, but it needs to be someone.
Yeah, we'll see, because training camp is a couple weeks away, fortunately. So thanks for joining us on the podcast daily as we flip over to the defensive side for the state of the position group. A couple more to go this week, and we're a week away now. A week from today, Tuesday, we'll be in Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days. So can't wait for that. Thanks again for joining us. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. We'll talk to you tomorrow.